All right, so the second section in this unit is 4.1, and this is about congruent figures. So you guys already know what congruent figures are. You've been dealing with them, or I should say not figures, what congruent means. It means that they are the same size or equal, however you want to look at it. So on congruent figures, if they have the exact same size and shape, they are congruent. So they can be, be slid over and be in a different spot. They can be turned, they can be flipped, but they are still congruent. That doesn't change their actual shape and size. So whenever this is really big, whenever you are describing two congruent figures, as you notice, I really like how they color-coded this example. Whenever you're doing it, you need to line up the vertexes at the same point. So if you notice, they did A and E because those are the corresponding congruent vertex. Okay, then the next one they did B, F, D, next is purple, C, and then G, and then D, and then H, because those are all the congruent figures. So if you're going to say this figure is congruent to the other figure, you must have all of the corresponding angles lined up. Otherwise, it'll be wrong. So that's huge. So take the time, slow down to do that. So part of this lesson is just naming the sides. So they said that AB is congruent to EF, So if you notice, the A and the E correspond to the B and the F. The next one is BC is congruent to FG. Then let's do CD is congruent to GH. And last but not least, DA is congruent to HE. Okay, those were the sides. So if I ask you to list all corresponding sides, that's what you'll do. And make sure you have the congruent symbol, not the equal symbol, because that's what we're talking about, even though they are kind of the same. Just put the congruent symbol. Okay, this next one is to identify the congruent angles. So angle A is congruent to E, angle B is congruent to angle F, angle C is congruent to angle G, and angle D is congruent to H. So this is like what you're going to have to do on your homework, or one of the things. Okay, so, here we go. We're right into it. So if HIJK is congruent to LMNO, what are the congruent corresponding parts? So how many sides do these have? Well, we're going to need 4 sides and 4 angles. Okay, so there's a few different ways to do it. You can look at the directions because I told you they're already congruent. Or you can look at the figures, which sometimes is a little bit harder. It looks like this one has been flipped and rotated. Yeah, so this angle corresponds with this angle, that one and that one, L and H, and M and I. Well, how did I know that? Well, if you look up here, it tells you. So I and M, H and L, K and O, and then the last one was J and N. So that can really help you just by reading the directions, because they kind of give you the answers. So first, let's list our 4 angles. So we have, let's do my green one. So angle H and angle, or it's not do, don't do and, do is congruent to angle L. Angle K is congruent to angle O. Angle J is congruent to angle N. And angle I is congruent to angle M. Okay, those are the 4 angles. Check, we have that done. Now the next one is a little bit trickier, but that's okay, we can still do it. So let's go green to red. So H to K, and that is a segment, is congruent to green to red on this one would be L to O. And if you notice, we just did H to K and L to O. So that's something for you to be aware of, that make sure the numbers are in the same, or the letters, excuse me, are in the same place in the congruent statement. Okay, then let's do K to J. So we're doing red to blue. K to J, red to blue, O to N. Okay, that was there. Then let's do, oh, I forgot to put that. So then let's do J to I, blue to yellow. J to I is congruent to N to M. And then the last one would be yellow to green, so H to I is congruent to L to M. LM, segment LM. So if I were you, I would be color coding, especially because you have the iPads and you can change colors really easily. Just kind of makes everything a little bit easier. But if you want to be stubborn and not do that, that's okay. That's on you. Okay, are the triangles congruent? Justify your answer. Well, in order for it to be congruent, we've already said they have to have all of the same angle sizes and all of the same side lengths. So, AB, what's AB's corresponding congruent side? Well, AB is congruent to ED. Okay, let's do the other side. BC is congruent to DC, right? Because it both says they're 4. Okay, and then the last side would be AC is congruent to EC because they're both 6. Okay, so we just have all 3 sides. Now what about the angles? So angle A is congruent to angle E because that's given, right? They have the one little mark. Angle B is congruent to angle D because it has the 2 marks, the 2 congruent symbols. Okay, now the next one is, do we know that those last 2 angles are congruent? Hopefully you're thinking, yes, we do. So angle BCA, and notice I'm using 3 letters because if I just said angle C, that could mean 4 different things. So angle BCA is congruent to ECD. Angle ECD because they are vertical, and vertical angles are congruent. So are these triangles congruent? They absolutely are, right? They have all the same sides, they have all the same measures of angles, so we need to write our congruent symbol, or a congruent statement. So remember, the angles need to line up. So I start with the vertexes, that's how you do this. So it's a triangle, so you're going to do triangle A is congruent to triangle, what's A's corresponding angle? Well, that would be E, so E needs to come first. Okay, the next angle doesn't matter if you chose B, I'm going to choose B. Let's just, AB, what is B's corresponding angle? That would be D. So B comes second, D comes second. Has to be lined up. And the last one must be, you're not going to write it like this on here, you're just going to give me one letter, and that will be C. And we know those are congruent because they're vertical angles, so that's how you would write your congruence statement for those 2 triangles. Okay, third angles theorem. You are going to use this quite a bit. It's called third angles theorem. What did I just do? Okay, try it again. If 2 angles of one triangle are congruent to 2 angles of another triangle, then the third angles are also congruent. So if B is congruent to E and A is congruent to D, then this angle must be congruent to this angle. Why is that? Well, because all the angles add up to be 180, and if the blue and the red angles are the same, then they're going to add to be 180 and be missing this third angle, and those third angles are going to be the same. Okay, so before we do that, let's go on to this. Classifying triangles by sides. So a scalene triangle has how many congruent sides? The answer is 0. There's no congruent sides. Okay, an isosceles triangle has at least 2 congruent sides. Okay, an equilateral triangle has all 3 sides are congruent. So these are some vocabulary words that you'll definitely want to memorize. Okay, and you probably already know most of them. So classifying triangles by angles. So there's 2 different ways you can classify them. We've talked about sides. Now let's talk about the angles. So acute triangles, or whenever you have 3 acute angles. So all 3 angles are acute. A right triangle is when you have 1 right angle. An obtuse triangle is when you have 1 obtuse angle in it. And then an equal angular goes with equilateral. That if you have an equilateral, it's going to be an equal angular, and vice versa. So that means all 3 angles are congruent. Okay, so now let's do this. And so if you want, you can draw a triangle. It's not necessary on this. So QX is going to be congruent to the first letter and the second letter. So that would be segment NY. Literally, that's it. Okay, the next one, angle Y. Angle Y is in the middle is congruent to angle X because it's also in the middle. That's all. Okay, try this one. If you want to pause the video and try it on your own, do it. So the first letter is going to be R. And the second letter is A, so our second letter will be O. So segment TA is congruent to RO. And then the last one, angle R is the last angle, so it'll be congruent to angle T. And that's how we write these congruent segment or statements correctly, and the order does matter, so you can do stuff like this. Uh-oh, now we have 4 letters. That'll be all right. We can handle it. So angle U is going to be congruent with angle A. Okay. DB, so it'll be D is congruent with K, and then B is congruent with L, so it'll be KL. Oh no, there's all 4 letters, that's all right. So we're gonna have N is congruent with the third one, so C. D is congruent with the last one, K. B is next, so that'll be L. And A will be congruent with U. So that's how you would write that. All right, last little piece, we get to do 2 proofs. Good news is the proofs in this unit are way easier than the last one. Like, extremely a lot easier, promise. So don't yell at me about the proofs. So let's do the first one. We have our statements and our reasons. So there's a lot that they do in the given, okay? And thankfully they marked it for us too. How nice of them. So let's write all that given stuff. LM is congruent to LO. MN is congruent to ON. Angle M is congruent to angle O. Angle MLN is congruent to angle OLN. The reason is all of that is given to us. All right, so now that we have all that, we are trying to prove that the triangle LMN is congruent to the triangle LON. So don't quit on me yet. So we have the sides, we have these angles, the second sides. So what else do we need to prove this is a congruent triangle? Well, we need to know that that third side is congruent, right? So that third side would be LN. This is kind of a silly one, but this comes up quite often. Is LN congruent with LN? Absolutely, it's the same line. So if LN is congruent with LN, which it is, so then this would be, I don't remember if you remember from Unit 1, we talked about this, and this property comes up a lot, so if you don't remember it, you need to have it memorized. This will be the reflexive property of, and we're talking about congruence, so of congruence. So reflexive is when it's the same thing. One thing equals the same thing, okay, just like that. All right, so now we've got all three sides that are identified as congruent. Sweet, there's that. This eraser on this thing hates me. I'm not using Notability, so that's why. Okay, so now in order for these two triangles to be congruent, we need to know all the sides and all the angles are congruent. We've already done all the sides, check. Now let's see about the angles. So they've given us M and O are congruent, and then MLN, which is that one, is congruent with OLN, which is that one. So all that's left is this angle and this angle. Are they congruent? Yes, they are. And do you remember what the reason is? Oh, you thought it would just go away? Nope, that's the third angles theorem. If we have two of the angles that are congruent in one triangle, the third angle must also be congruent. So we're gonna list that. Angle, let's say LNO, that's the bottom one, is congruent to angle LNM. And the reason is the third angles theorem. Okay, so now let's double check. Do we have all of our sides are congruent? Yes. Do we have all three angles that are congruent? Yes, because we listed two of them in given. Okay, so we have enough information to say that those two triangles are congruent. So that would be the triangle LMN, and remember the order matters, but they already give it to you right here, so just write that down, is congruent to LON. And the reason is the definition of congruent triangles. Because we said all the angles are congruent and all the sides are congruent. Okay, this next one. All right, so it's a similar problem. If you want to try to pause the video and do it yourself, by all means, try it. If not, just follow along with the video. So first, of course, we have to list out our givens. So angle A is congruent to angle D. Segment AE is congruent to DC. EB is congruent to CB. And BA is congruent to BD. And the reason is given. So as you probably noticed, they gave us one angle that's congruent and then all three sides are congruent. So really all we have to do is prove that those last two angles are congruent, okay? So let's talk about the one that we have to start with. What do you notice about this angle? All right, this angle and this angle. Hopefully you thought, oh, those are vertical angles, so they're congruent, because that's exactly the right answer. So angle, and since I can't say angle B because angle B could be a lot of different things, so you have to give me all three letters. So angle ABE is congruent with angle CBD. And the reason is vertical angles theorem. Okay, so we've got that angle. Good. Now we have that last angle. There's last two angles, I should say. So this one and this one. Are they congruent? The answer is yes. So angle E is congruent to angle C. Why? Well, we're going to use that third angles theorem again, and that is very popular to use on this, so you'll get really used to that. So third angles theorem. Okay, so now we've had all three sides that are stated as congruent and all three angles are stated as congruent. Finally, we are done. We are ready to write our final congruent statement. Triangle AEB is congruent with triangle DCB, and it's going to be the same as the last one. Definition of congruent, and I'm going to triangles. I'm going to do the abbreviation. All right, I know this is a long video. Thank you for watching.